Hello, welcome to EPG Pathshala program in Linguistics. We are at module 7 of the course Introduction to Phonetics and Phonology. In module 4, we looked at the various places of articulation. In this module, we do the same by going into further details. Let us briefly review the places of articulation to which we were introduced in module 4. Take a look at the slide. As you go through the list of the places of articulation, you will notice there to be 3 columns. One, the names of the places of articulation. 2, the articulators involved in producing these places of articulation, and 3, examples of speech sounds which for each of those places of articulation from English and from some Indic languages. Now, you notice that for each place of articulation in general, there are 2 articulators involved. They are known as active articulator and passive articulator. The basic difference between the 2 articulators is that in one, namely active articulator, the articulators are flexible and mobile, such as the tongue and the uvula. The passive articulators, on the other hand, are fixed and towards which the active articulator moves, such as the teeth or the hard palate. Now, 2 of the places of articulation you will notice here at the extreme ends, namely bilabial and glottal, are exceptional in this case, because in the production of which both the articulators are active articulators. Since both the lips are involved in producing the speech sounds and the 2 sets of vocal cords are involved in producing those speech sounds. In all other cases, we have an active articulator positioned against a passive articulator. Let's take a look at the consonant chart of the IFPA alphabet as we have seen before. You will notice here that there are 12 places of articulation here. The fricatives seem to be illustrating almost all those places of articulation, but most other manners of articulation have speech sounds produced only at some of the places. We will take a look at those manners of articulation and places of articulation and try to relate them in the remaining part of this module. I suggest that you watch and listen to the clipped video for a graphic account of the places and manners of articulation. The link is given in the slide that follows. Now, as we go through the list of the places of articulation, we find that there are groups of these places that seem to be natural, to form natural groups, such as sonorants and obstruents. Now, there are sounds, all the vowels, and some of the consonants are sonorant consonants, and some of the consonants only are obstruent consonants. Now, most of the places of articulation can be described in terms of the parts of the tongue involved in producing them. There are 3 main parts of the tongue involved in producing the consonant sounds. 1, the tip and the blade of the tongue. 2, the front and the back of the tongue. And 3, the root of the tongue. The diagram for the various parts of the tongue was already introduced in the earlier modules. Please go back to them in case of doubt and clarify yourself as to what the terms mean. For example, the term front means actually around the center of the tongue. The root is quite at the basis of the tongue. Similarly, the blade refers to the sides and the tip to the absolute front end of the tongue. Now, based on these 3 parts of the tongue, involved in producing consonant sounds, we have three major groups of consonants: coronal consonants, dorsal consonants, and guttural consonants. Coronal consonants are those in the production of which the tip and the blade are involved. Dorsal consonants are those in the production of which the front and the back of the tongue are involved, and guttural consonants are those in the production of which the root of the tongue is involved. There is a fourth group, namely labial, and together coronal, dorsal, guttural, and labial make four main groups of the places of articulation. We take a look at them one by one. We will begin with the labial sounds. There are two main places of labial sounds, namely bilabial and labiodental. And there are four main manners of articulation which are produced at these places of articulation. These are plosives. So we have bilabial plosives, we have bilabial nasals, we have bilabial fricatives, and we have bilabial approximants. Some of those manners, such as fricatives and approximants, are also labiodental. Now, when we look at the labial sounds, for many speakers, there are certain difficult areas that we should pay attention to. For example, the plosive sound p, which is a bilabial sound, and the fricative sound f, which is a labiodental sound, are sometimes not distinguished in the speech of some speakers. Thus, in the speech of many languages such as Oriya, Bangla, Marathi, and so many others, normally the speakers tend to pronounce p and they find it difficult to pronounce f. And languages in which the distinction is necessary, then they are unable to distinguish the sounds in them, such as, for example, English, which makes a clear distinction between p and f, such pat versus fat. Now, Indian learners of English have to learn to distinguish them. Similarly, we have two different sounds, bh and v, the fricative v and the plosive bh. Often speakers are unable to distinguish between them. They must learn to distinguish them by being aware of the fact that one of them is bilabial bh and the other is a labiodental v. One of them is a plosive bh and the other is a fricative v. And these have to be practiced well for those who find it hard to distinguish them. Then we also have speakers finding it difficult to produce a fricative v. In the speech of many Indian speakers, the fricative v is often pronounced as an approximant v, or a bilabial v. So very is pronounced as very or very, and this causes a certain problem in understanding this speech, especially of English. Similarly, we also have some languages where we have some very difficult sounds, such as f, and v. There are Indian languages in which we have all of them. Thus, Greater Andamanese has a very infrequent sound, namely f, as a distinctive sound, and a Tibeto-Burman language, Chokri, spoken in Nagaland and Manipur, has a distinct sound, namely v, a bilabial fricative. So these are some of the sounds in the labial range which speakers find difficult to distinguish. They have to learn to practice them. Like for the vowel chart, the IPA has the consonant chart. You can go back to them and click on the sounds that you find difficult to produce and try and listen to them and practice them. The next group of places of articulation is the coronal place. which is produced with the tip and the blade of the tongue. There are three main types of these coronal sounds: those which are apical, or those which are laminal, and those which are subapical. That is, in the production of which either the tip of the tongue is used, or it is the sides of the tongue used, or it is below the tip of the tongue which is used. There are about at least 5 places of articulation which are coronal places of articulation. That means a wide range of places of articulation is produced by the tip and the blade of the tongue. These are dental, alveolar, postalveolar, retroflex, and palatoalveolar. We have already discussed the reason why in the IPA chart the dental, the alveolar, and the postalveolar are all put together. We remind ourselves of the fact that a language such as Malayalam actually distinguishes them. So we have dental and alveolar plosives and nasals in Malayalam. Coronal sounds have at least 2 main features, namely anterior and distributed. Some of the coronal consonants are those in the production of which the tip and the blade, a small part of the tongue, is involved. These are said to be anterior consonants. There are consonants such as t, which are anterior consonants, and there are consonants such as the retroflex consonant t or d. Notice that in producing a good t and a good d, you have a fairly large chunk of the tongue involved. We say that these coronals are distributed coronals because a longer stretch of the tongue is involved in producing them. Of these those 5 places of articulation, at least 4 of them are anterior, and 1 of them is distributed. Of the 4, 1 of them is both anterior and distributed. Now, dental consonants are those which are both anterior and distributed. In the production of a dental consonant, the, it is the tip and the blade of the tongue involved, and a larger chunk of the tip and the blade of the tongue are involved. Retroflex consonants are also anterior, and these seem to be a very special feature of Indic languages. There are retroflex consonants in world languages found in different parts of the world. However, India is special in this feature that a large number of languages from at least three major groups of languages such as Indo-Aryan, Dravidian, and Austroasiatic. Alphabetically, Austroasiatic, Dravidian, and Indo-Aryan. These 3 language groups have lots of retroflex consonants, so much so that the India as a linguistic area is often identified with retroflexes. When we look at the retroflexes produced in India, we find that there are at least 2 different retroflexes. Those which are very hard ones, found especially in Dravidian languages, such as the strong t, and those which are soft ones, found in languages such as Bangla, t. Now, we have 2 different symbols for representing these retroflexes. A strong one, take a look at the chart, you will find that for the retroflexes you have a hook underneath, subscript, and underneath hook below these consonant symbols. For a soft one, we use the device of a dot below a symbol. So a T with the dot means it's a soft retroflex consonant, and a T with the hook beneath is a strong retroflex consonant. One of the best known phoneticians, Labial, distinguished between them and thought that languages differ on account of whether they have soft or hard retroflexes. The third group of places of articulation is known as the dorsal place of articulation. These are mainly 2, namely velar and uvular. Now we have velar sounds, we have plosives, very commonly found in languages. Almost all languages have at least g or a g. Then we have nasals, ng, widely found in most languages. We have fricatives, kh, gh, which are again velar, and approximants, something like and a lateral, difficult to pronounce, but something like a la. So we have the very infrequent sound, but found in some languages for distinguishing words. Thus we have plosives, nasals, fricatives, and approximants and laterals, 5 different manners of articulation produced at the velar place. In some languages, there is a very unusual type of velar sound produced, such as a voiceless velar nasal, as in miso, something like nga, nga, nga. Now these require for us to be able to distinguish them by practicing their production and listening to their production. Many Indian languages, not just one, miso, but there are other languages also which have voiceless nasal sounds. The second place of articulation, which is dorsal, is the uvular place of articulation. We have 2 manners of articulation which are uvular, namely plosive and fricative. These are not so easy to practice. Again, go to the chart and try and listen to them and practice them. I will attempt a pronunciation of them here. The plosives are q and g. These are uvular plosives. I repeat, q and g. And then we have uvular fricatives, namely kh and gh, kh and gh. The most well-known language which has these uvular sounds is Arabic, and among Indian languages we have a Dravidian language, Malto, which also has uvular plosives in it. There is a third place called epiglottal, which is also found for consonants in a few languages of the world, such as Arabic. So we have voiceless plosives, voiceless fricatives, voiced fricatives or approximants, which are said to be epiglottal sounds. We next move to the guttural, last of the groups of places of articulation. Guttural means of the throat. So most of these sounds are produced between the throat and the uvula. The main places of articulation here are pharyngeal and glottal. Now the pharyngeal sounds are mainly fricatives. Fricatives are pharyngeal sounds. It is very difficult to produce a plosive in that place. Arabic has these pharyngeal fricatives, and so has Dutch. Now you take a look at the diagram on the slide, which shows which part of the tongue is involved in producing the pharyngeal sound. This diagram is drawn for the production of the Arabic pharyngeal sound. If you look at the pharyngeal wall, what we notice is that there is a large chunk of the pharyngeal wall which is involved in producing just one place of articulation called pharyngeal place. Now there are 2 consequences of this feature. One is that it is often very difficult to distinguish pharyngeal sounds from some other sounds, such as epiglottal sounds. The other is that a pharyngeal sound in one language may be quite different from a pharyngeal sound in another language. Researchers working on speech sounds of languages where there are pharyngeal sounds are often tricked into classifying the sounds somewhat wrongly as epiglottal versus pharyngeal. It should be noted that as long as a sound is produced on the pharyngeal wall by the root of the tongue, it's a pharyngeal sound. We listen to 2 sounds which are pharyngeal sounds in two languages, Arabic and Assamese in India. Whereas in Arabic, the pharyngeal sound is pretty low, like ha, ha, ha. In Assamese, the pharyngeal sound is heard to be a little high, such as h, 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 so that they appear to be almost two different types of sounds, but actually both of them are pharyngeal sounds. The final place of articulation is glottal, which is also a guttural sound. What we notice is that we have only two possibilities here, a glottal plosive and a glottal fricative. The glottal plosive is also called a glottal stop. It is commonly found in many Indic languages, especially Austroasiatic and Tibeto-Burman languages. These languages distinguish words on the basis of the use of the glottal stop. However, a glottal stop seems to be a phonetic feature. It is often found in many languages, even though the sound is not used for distinguishing words. For example, in Assamese, if a word begins with a vowel, then it begins with a glottal stop. So you say ahom. Instead of ahom, you will say ahom. And thus, the glottal stop is present in the speech of these languages where it is not used to distinguish them. So we have come to the close of Module 7, in which we have looked at great length the various places of articulation involved in producing consonants. All the places of articulation can be grouped into four main types, depending on the four main articulators involved in producing them. We have classified them as bilabial, as coronal, as dorsal, and as guttural. What we have tried to do is to see what manners of articulation actually are possible at those places of articulation. We've also looked at some of the difficult areas. For you, it is necessary that you practice those sounds which you find hard and difficult to produce or to perceive. So again, go to the chart and try to listen to the sounds and try to look at the exercises which are available for us in distinguishing those two sounds. I suggest you go to the textbook of Peter Ladefoged entitled Vowels and Consonants. In that book, Peter Ladefoged goes to a great length at distinguishing all these sounds and allowing you to practice them. In Module 7, we are mainly concerned with introducing ourselves to the places of articulation. Our objective is to be able to see the natural groupings among the various places of articulation and their relation to the different manners of articulation. And it is expected that you will practice the various places of articulation in relation to the various manners of articulation from the IPA chart. So please keep the IPA chart before you while you are learning about the places of articulation. Thank you for